Alright, so let's read here about Betsy Stockton. Let's read here. This is from a great book the backpack should have provided, but apparently forgot. Profiles of African American Missionaries, right? Let's check this out. When you read the standard history of the Hawaiian Islands, her name doesn't appear, although it should. And Kenneth Porter has an article on black folks in early Hawaii, and he also passes over her. But look at her bio, and you'll see why she should be included. She was born to a slave mother about 1798, and she passed her childhood as the, quote, property of Robert Stockton of Princeton, New Jersey. He lived on Constitution Hill, was actually a cousin of Richard Stockton, one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence. There's no record of her father, and either he or her grandfather was most likely a white man, based on what we know. And so later on, Major Stockton, her, quote, owner, gave the young servant girl to his oldest daughter, and the man that she was married to, Ashbel Green, was a Presbyterian minister in Philadelphia. Later on, Dr. Green would write this about Betsy Stockton in a letter of recommendation for Betsy, supporting her application as a missionary candidate. He wrote this: "By me and my wife, she was never intended to be held as a slave." Now, he said that, but yet he held on to her. See, this is the compromise a lot of Christians made. And they treated her good, from what I can read, but never is 100% equal. And it's a real shame. There's a failure of Christianity during this time to recognize full equality with black folks here. Even ones who were abolitionists a lot of times did not recognize the need for a full equality. Dr. Green was an anti-slavery advocate, though, as was his Presbyterian minister before him. And he talks about until she was 20, she didn't really show that she was serious about the Lord. In fact, she's described quite unflattering when she was 13 or 14. But she had a radical conversion. And so, there's a question about her baptism and all kinds of stuff. Anyways, when she got saved, she changed. And immediately, even though she was recognized as willful, she was always recognized as bright, and she immediately went after biblical knowledge. So she was systematically tutored, this is when she's around 20, I believe, in the academic and spiritual disciplines given their own children. So it's kind of, at least that's nice, she was able to be educated alongside the children of the household. So she was basically homeschooled by Dr. Green, and in fact she would do the catechism, Westminster, I'm sure, along with his own sons. And that's interesting, and apparently she had quite an affection for them. In fact, later on when she went to Hawaii as a missionary, she took pains to collect specimens of unusual seashells and insects because he was a scientist and for his research. So anyways, she then, for a few reasons, ended up living in the country with his niece and her husband, Reverend Nathaniel Todd. So notice again, these are Christian slaveholders. Anyways, now when she turned 20, he did free her, but she chose to remain with the family as a hired woman. So she went from a slave to a servant, but she was free at this point. And she attributes her conversion to a seminary student named Eliphalet Wheeler Gilbert, and she says this happened in the summer of 1816 while she was sitting in the gallery of Princeton's First Presbyterian Church. Now it's called Nassau. And the minutes of that congregation record this in September 20th, 1816. Betsy Stockton, a colored woman living in the family of the Reverend Dr. Green, applied for admission to the Lord's table. So it means she was going to get communion. So obviously she, was in it. She was later publicly baptized, and then within the next 2 years when she was freed. So anyways, she realized she needed to tell people about Jesus, and this conviction blossomed into desire to go to Africa as a missionary. And so she had to get educated. So for about a year and a half, she was a member of a Sabbath school class taught by a seminary student named Michael Osborne, who was impressed by her. And in fact, he wrote her a letter of recommendation. Listen to what he said. This is a seminary student writing about Betsy Stockton in his class. Quote, "She has a larger acquaintance with sacred history and the Mosaic institutions than almost any ordinary person, old or young, that I have ever known." Now, what does he mean by ordinary? He means a non-specialist. He's saying not a member of the clergy or candidate for ministry. He's saying out of all the lay people I've ever met, black and white, old and young, no one knows the Bible better. That's amazing. And Osborne said this: I recollect a multitude of instances where, for my own information, I have questioned her about some fact in biblical history or some minute point in Jewish antiquities and have immediately received a correct answer. So he would forget something and he would ask her and she remembered it and he didn't. He's a seminary student. But yet, she's not going to be able to go overseas because the Protestants at that time were not ready to send a single woman overseas without a protector. And of course, remember, she's black. Yet she had a lot of skills. She was well trained in domestic concerns, and she had skills as a nurse through basic life experience. So she was a skilled lady, plus, as we mentioned, bright. So finally it worked out where she became part of a family, Charles and Harriet Stewart. And they went to these islands called Hawaii now, which were discovered, so-called, by Captain James Cook in 1778 and named for the Earl of Sandwich at the time, which is the guy who invented the sandwich. And here's a testimonial letter to Jeremiah Everett's corresponding secretary of the ABCFM, and this outlined her qualifications. So this is another recommendation about Betsy Stockton. I would say in general, as the result of an intimate acquaintance with her, that I think her pious, intelligent, industrious, skillful in the management of domestic affairs, apt to teach, and endued with a large portion of the active, persevering, self-sacrificing spirit of a missionary. So listen to her qualifications. She's overly qualified. From my first acquaintance with her, she has expressed a decided wish to go to the heathen. And she loved to teach children, so she would spend a part of her week, every week, teaching young black kids. And this is according to another recommendation. She had a respectable knowledge of, listen to this, geography, legible writing, and some effort at ciphering and compound multiplication. Oh, man. So finally she's getting to go. And she says, I am as happy as I ever was in my life. In the winter of 1822 and 1823. So they go down and they meet the first natives of the island. And listen to this. She says they were chilled when they first saw them because they were mostly naked. And then this is from Betsy's own words. She says this when she met the Hawaiians. Are these, thought I, the beings with whom I must spend the remainder of my life? They are men so she was tripping out, right? Then she says, they are men and have souls, was the reply which Conscience made. That's pretty cool. That is pretty cool. And so she at first was like freaked out by them and then said, wait, they have souls. Let's be there. If only more white Christians of her day would have thought the same way, that would have been great. So she established a school there in Hawaii and began instruction in English to 6 Hawaiians and 4 English youth. And then while there, the missionary had a child, and of course she was also caring for the missionary's son. So she's doing a lot. And finally, she actually met a black man on the island, Anthony Allen. He had been there 20 years and had never met a black woman before. He had a native wife. That was interesting. So here she is, a school teacher, and she wrote and said this: I now have a fine school of the lower class of people, the first, I believe, that has ever been established. So she's the first teacher of Hawaii. Established the first school in Hawaii, basically. And it began, I guess, with about 30 individuals, and they would meet in the chapel there. And guess what? She became, quote, quite familiar with the native language. So here's Betsy, a former slave, was the first to organize a school for the disadvantaged, the lower class of the Hawaiians, and she learned their language as well. And then when she got back to Philadelphia, so she didn't stay in Hawaii the whole time, she also established an infant school for black children in Philadelphia. Then she did some other work while here. She organized schools and, hold on, wait a minute. Did she end up doing this? Oh, yeah. Organized schools and instructing Native American Indian children at Grape Island across the border at Canada. What's up, Dinu? So here's what happened, though. Here's what happened. She's going to this Presbyterian church there, right? And there's a man named Anthony Simmons, and he formed a school, the session house of the First Presbyterian Church. And she was a member of the church since 1816, so she probably taught there. But here's what happened. Well, that's not at the bad part yet. She also, I'm losing track of this lady's accomplishments. That's what's happening, guys. I'm reading through this, and I underlined a bunch of parts before, but I'm losing track of which school she did when. It's amazing. But she also succeeded in opening a public or, quote, common school for black children, which she served with great distinction for many years as a principal. But here she is in Princeton. Guess what happened at First Presbyterian Church? This is unfortunate. Racial tension. So they had been together, a black and white congregation, this whole time, but eventually the white Christians became worse, not better. And so the black Christians asked to leave, and the white Christians said, okay. So some of you guys are like, why is there a black church? Why is there a white church? Mainly because white Christians wouldn't put up with black people going to church with them. That's why. So if you wonder why there's a black church and a white church, now things might naturally happen. You know, there's cultural differences, all that kind of stuff, but things would be a lot different if white Christians throughout American evangelical and fundamentalists and mainline history would have said, you know, we can go to church with black people instead of making them sit over there. And usually the black people would even put up with being made to sit over there. But when things got so bad, they eventually had to leave. And the white people were like, yeah, that's fine. And then they would try to control their church from afar. It's just really bad. It's just really bad. But this is what happened. I keep on reading account after account about this stuff. So they formed their own congregation a few blocks away. And she wrote a petition. She joined it in 1845 to form their own congregation. And they met for the first time at December 21st, 1845. 92 people formed the First Presbyterian Church of Color of Princeton, which is now called Witherspoon Street Church. At least that's what it got renamed in 1848. And she labored at the church and in the black community there at Princeton until her death in 1865. She also helped found a Sabbath school for children and young people in connection with the church and was its most faithful teacher for 25 or 30 years. And they all knew her as Aunt Betsy. But if you read her letters and her journal, she is constantly speaking of sadness and loneliness and marginalization. You know, she was a missionary, which makes you lonely as it is. But then also, she was the only black missionary and was never treated as a complete equal by the others. And that's tough. So she had a lot of pain in her life. She had a lot of pain. But she's a superstar, just like someone said in the live chat. Now let's read this little general outline about her one more time. 1850 Princeton revival influenced her, which led to her conversion, which we read about. She's born into slavery in Princeton, New Jersey in 1798. Became the first single American woman missionary. Now that's impressive because she was not only black, but she was the first single American woman missionary. You see what I'm saying? Of any color. So-called teacher of its first mission school, Hawaii, she trained Native Hawaiian teachers, established a school for Native Americans in Canada, taught poor blacks in Philly, and helped found Princeton's First Presbyterian Church of Color.
Street apologist. Street apologist. Street apologist. Street apologist. Street apologist. Street apologist.